Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward, two of our very best at Action Network, and they cover, that's right, UFC. UFC betting previews are back on the Action Network podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the pod on the audio side. Also on our Action Network YouTube channel, subscribe, like the video. Every Friday, we're back, Sean, Billy, and myself. These two will give out some underdogs, props, and best bets in the UFC Vegas 85 at the Apex facility in Las Vegas, UFC Fight Night. Getting you set. We'll dive into all the angles. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we dive in. If you are new to UFC, you're using this weekend as a break from the NFL with the bye week and you're getting yourself back into it, if you're accustomed to betting UFC and you're diving back in, a great way to get yourself refamiliarized. The Action Network has a great guide for you. If you go to the Action Network YouTube page, we have a video going back to last summer, UFC betting strategy, expert tips and advice from pro bettors. That is a video. That's the title of the video. And Sean and Billy actually join Maria Marino, and they give some insight on some do's, some don'ts, some suggestions as far as how you want to look at a card each week. So without further ado, let's dive in, shall we? UFC Vegas Fight Night. Here we go. Main event. Roman Dolidze. He is the underdog this weekend in the main event, taking on Nasruddin Imavov. This is going to take a bit to get reaccustomed to names, too. Of course, they just want you to get right back into it. Okay, Sean Zerillo, I'll go to you first. So what do you make of the line? And then how do you want to bet this fight?
Yeah, if you are taking a break from the NFL this week, trying to bet on something else, I'm sorry. This is not the best fight card, but always happy to have fights to bet on, and especially after a week off, happy to have some fights to watch again. And Imavov versus Dolidze, not the most interesting main event, but an important one for the rankings in the middleweight division. Now, breaking this fight down, Dolidze, the bigger finisher, the bigger man, used to fight at 205. Imavov, a little bit smaller. The measurables on paper look pretty comparable, but once they're in the cage, I expect Dolidze to be the more powerful striker and to have more finishing upside. If he wins the fight, I expect him to win by finish, either knockout or submission, close to 80% of the time. If Imavov wins the fight, I have him winning the decision about 55% of the time. So generally speaking, I tend to see Imavov winning later, Dolidze winning earlier, and that also sort of trends with their career experience and, you know, their trend line of their recent fights. Imavov coming off of a career best performance against Chris Curtis, that fight ended early due to accidental headbutt. He has been in a main event before. We've seen him stretch that cardio out over 5 rounds. Doesn't have the best cardio, but he has had to go 5 rounds before and prove it, and that experience certainly helps going forward. Dolidze is older. I believe he's 6 or 7 years older. So going 5 rounds for the first time, not going to be to his benefit. He also hasn't shown the best cardio even in 3-round fights. So I think the later fights, rounds 4 and 5, certainly favor Imavov. I think it may be a spot where you can live bet, but he hasn't shown the best cardio, as I've mentioned, throughout his career. So I just view him as the fighter with more ways to win, the better minute winner, more likely to be on top after takedowns, and probably more likely to be on head in terms of striking volume too. I think if Dolidze wins this fight, he's either going to need to get a finish or he's probably going to need a few big moments where he gets knockdowns without ultimately securing the finish. So Imavov at minus 160, I think is a fair price. I projected him closer to about 65%, so roughly minus 180. So anything at about minus 170 or better, I'll take on the favorite and lay it with Nasruddin Imavov. And as I said, you may look into maybe some decision props for Imavov with the fight going longer, or even a same game parlay with Imavov in the over 2.5 rounds. That pays out at about plus 140. You're essentially giving away 1/3 of his win condition over the first half of the fight. So not necessarily to your benefit, but, you know, in terms of breaking it down, but in terms of the way the fight plays out, I actually think he's more likely to win in the final 2.5 rounds or by decision.
Imavov using the takedown in 3 of his last 4 UFC wins. Billy Ward, I should also add, housekeeping, a plug for Billy, the Action Network UFC luck ratings, not rankings, not to be confused with NFL, the luck ratings. You found this line to be fairly valued. So with that being said, how would you like to bet the main event, Billy?
Yeah, you know, Sean queued me up nicely. I'm actually viewing the fight mostly the same way he is, and that Dolidze needs a finish. Imavov probably can win a decision. Imavov, he's the better technical striker, I'd say, by a pretty wide margin here. But he's mostly just trying to touch you and score points. He's not really a guy who more or less comes out aggressively hunting finishes on the feet. His last 2 stoppages have both been ground and pounded on the ground. But Dolidze is a former ADCC competitor, super dangerous submission guy. Got into MMA kind of late. He was just a pure submission grappler through much of his 20s. That says a lot about his cardio. I always bring up on here that those guys usually just do one long round. They don't really have the cardio to go back to the stool, back out, back to the stool, back out the way they do in UFC. So, everything in line with what Sean was saying. 2 ways you can play it. I took Dolidze by finish only at right around even money. That means if the fight goes to a decision, doesn't matter who wins, your bet gets refunded. Only way it pays out is if someone gets a finish. And then obviously the other way is Dolidze to do the finishing, right around plus 200, a little bit better. You could split between those two, but it's really just a risk tolerance thing. If you want to be on that side, those are the ways to play Dolidze. And then how much, do you want to chase the bigger payout, or do you want a little bit more insurance if the likelier option of it going to a decision happens?
Yeah, just to reiterate, I said, I give Dolidze about an 80% chance to finish if he wins the fight. Imavov about 45%. So the way I would handicap that finish only market, I'd probably make Dolidze closer to about minus 170, minus 175. I think his finishing upside is much higher, and I think that's a very square price, getting him at plus money to be the only one to finish.
Billy and Sean's fight of the night for UFC Fight Night. Renato Moicano taking on Drew Dober. Dober, the underdog, at plus 150. So Moicano, Zerillo, has the height advantage. He's got about 3 inches on Dober. Is he properly valued on the money line?
I think so. He's taller, longer, and if these two just strike it out for 15 minutes, I might actually favor Moicano straight up. He's the better technical striker. Dober is a brawler, though, and he's 3-0 inside the apex. I think the smaller cage helps him, just having opponents being more on top of him, not having to go as far to close the distance. And he does have more finishing upside on the feet. He hits very hard. I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of running back that Moicano fight against Rafael Fiziev at the apex where he got deaded in the first round. Moicano doesn't have the best chin. He's a BJJ guy, but he is the better technical fighter, the better technician on the feet in the stand-up. And I think the striking will be very close, if not favor him outright, aside from the moments where he potentially gets clipped. But the favoritism comes down to all of the grappling upside in this fight being in his favor. He's one of the best back takers in the sport, pretty confident that he's going to get Dober down multiple times, if not just once, and finish the fight. Dober has decent submission defense, but not as good once people get on his back. So Moicano, just as I said, one of the best fighters at taking the back in the sport. And once he gets the back, it's usually a wrap from there. So Moicano by submission, there's a bit of a price differentiation depending on a book. If you shop around, you can get as low as plus 120. I saw as high as plus 170, though. That seems like a pretty good price to me. Moicano to win inside the distance. And then just Moicano on the money line as well. I think there's definitely a chance that he just secures control, backpack against Dober for a large part of this fight and ultimately wins the decision. So fine laying minus 185 on Moicano. I projected his money line closer to about minus 200. It's about where I played up to is minus 185, but I think he's the right side in this fight.
Billy, where do you stand? And you can't ignore Moicano and his takedown accuracy. That's a big differentiator against Dober.
Yeah, that one's a little bit tricky because much of that came at 145, where he wasn't giving up the size and strength he is up at 155. I came into watching tape on this fight, like really trying to talk myself into Drew Dober, trying to find an angle to play the underdog here. And I just couldn't get there. I ended up agreeing with Sean. I think we're looking at this to a degree as a striker in Drew Dober versus a grappler in Moicano. But the more tape I watched on Moicano, I became less and less convinced that he's not the better striker too. Sean made some good points. Dober's probably got more power on the feet. Could definitely clip him and change the course of the fight with one. But if you look back, Drew Dober fought Brad Riddell, striking coach over at City Kickboxing, kind of got picked apart by Riddell. Moicano fought Brad Riddell. He finished him with a submission, but he hurt him on the feet before that. 3-minute sample size. We can't say for sure that he's the better striker. And we know MMA math doesn't work that way. But it was a pretty convincing data point for me that not only is we can all agree he's the better grappler, might even be the better striker. Don't feel confident that he ends up getting the submission because Dober's, got the good submission defense. Wouldn't be shocked if he pounded him out on the ground or landed a kick or something. So that leaves me no choice. I got to take the money line straight up. Think he wins. Don't really know how. Fine with laying the juice if he's better in, we think, all areas other than power.
Yeah, unless he gets like knocked down hard, eats one big shot and gets clipped and hurt, I really think he's going to control the fight, control the pace of the fight, really chew Dober up at range. Dober is very hittable. So, that second half of the Dos Santos fight for Moicano was very impressive too. How badly he was getting beaten up seemed like it was going to be stopped, and then he ultimately fought back. I believe he won the 5th round against Dos Santos as well. So a lot of heart in this guy. And as long as he's not flat on the canvas after a big power shot, I think he's going to be the winner.
I will say real quick before we move on, I guess my hesitancy early and why I was looking to Dober is we haven't seen Moicano in a little bit. He's had some injury issues. I think he's been out for a little over a year at this point. Yeah, it's November 22, his last fight. That's the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause on going too heavy here. But if we knew that that wasn't a factor and that he's in good shape and he's been training and he's sharp and all those other things that we occasionally take for granted, I'd be all in.
Yeah, it's just the 5 knockout losses against the guy with big power, who's super durable as well in Dober. Dober tends to be a fun guy to bet as an underdog because he's very difficult to knock out. And if you decide to brawl with him, he's more likely to finish you. So yeah, big juicy number on Dober, but don't think this is necessarily the right matchup for him.
And we saw him get knocked out pretty badly recently too. Everyone's got a great chin until they don't. And I'm going to talk about that with another fighter later on. But, we all say, Chuck Liddell for a million years couldn't hurt him. And then everybody knocked him out. So sometimes I worry if that's not Dober's 35, maybe it's just the start of a trend.
And it's also a sign of a physical decline, not only in terms of the chin, but also in terms of the speed. Like the athleticism, once the knockouts start coming, we'll talk about this with Alexander Volkanovski in a few weeks. Once the knockouts start coming, that athleticism, the speed tends to dip too, and all the skills sort of fold into one another. So even though these two are the same age, I think Moicano is the much fresher fighter in terms of physical, trajectory going forward.
If you're new to the podcast, I love the underdog segment because I'm curious as to what Sean and Billy might cook up and where they might see value. And you two are not shy to identify underdogs responsibly. You do your work behind the scenes, watch film, and look at numbers. And if there's a number that you like in the market that doesn't make a lot of sense, and you're actually in alignment in the welterweight matchup, Zerillo, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I like when Billy and I line up on an underdog. I think we've had a lot of success, actually, when we land on a consensus underdog. And this week we're going with Pete Rodriguez, which is kind of an atypical underdog play, I'd say, for us, because Billy and I usually find ways to fade fighters who don't make it out of the first round. Pete Rodriguez, all of his career MMA fights have ended in 2 minutes and 21 seconds or less. So there is so much unknown about this kid beyond the first round, beyond the 3-minute mark of the first round. And I think what Billy and I probably are falling back on here is where he trains. This is a kid who trains at MMA Lab, and this is one of the best gyms in the sport. And we continually see MMA Lab produce prospects with relatively no-name status right to the UFC level and immediately impress. Marcus McGee, the most recent name that comes to mind. They do tend to have more smaller fighters, more of these bantamweights, flyweights, not as many welterweights, guys Pete Rodriguez's size. So not really sure, right, who he's training with in that room, but I do trust the gym, and I do trust that there's some sort of base beyond 3 minutes of skill in Pete Rodriguez's game if this fight does extend. And you're getting all of that baked into the price here at plus 210. I think he's clearly the better boxer in this fight with Themba Gorimbo. He is at a huge reach disadvantage, 6-inch reach discrepancy. Really don't think that is going to matter on the feet. Gorimbo, the better grappler. The longer limbs probably going to help him if he gets this fight to the mat. But standing, Rodriguez, a huge speed advantage, huge technical boxing advantage. I think he's very live to finish this fight, and I like his odds at plus 210. You're also baking in the unknown here that we get him winning a decision. Just get him as the better striker over the course of 15 minutes, that his takedown defense holds up better than we think it might. Again, there's so much unknown that we're betting into with Rodriguez here. Don't really know how his defensive grappling is, what his cardio looks like. So some alternative ways to play this fight. Rodriguez by knockout, Rodriguez in round 1, Rodriguez by round 1 knockout. That is how he's won fights in the past. And frankly, I do expect him to win the first round here, which is why I'm betting him pre-fight. And then I think you'll get an opportunity to jump in on Gorimbo live after round 1. So Pete Rodriguez, the clear pre-fight side for my perspective, especially finishing all of his wins in round 1. And then I think you take it from there and maybe look for a live price on Gorimbo after round 1, potentially plus money too. You try to get plus money on both sides of this fight as Rodriguez moves away from his likeliest win conditions. So Rodriguez early and then Gorimbo live is how I'd play this.
Okay. And Billy, Pete Rodriguez has come down from plus 240. So this number keeps coming down, a price you want to jump on sooner rather than later. BetMGM still offering plus 200.
Yeah, so this is a really, I think, fun fight to try to handicap because we don't know a ton about either guy. Pete Rodriguez came in on super short notice and fought Jack Della Maddalena, who's now like a top 10 ranked welterweight. That went exactly how you'd expect. He got starched in the first round. Actually had some moments with some good body shots before that. Jackie made a little adjustment, picked him apart, bam. Next fight, he fights like the worst UFC fighter ever in Mike Jackson and obliterates him in the first round. Neither of those tell us anything. Like, I would have had the exact same results in those two fights as Pete Rodriguez did. Brendan, you probably would have. Sean, you probably would have too. Like, I think all three of us would have lost to Jack Della Maddalena.
I don't think I would have landed a body shot on Jack Della, but yes.
Well, not that part, but the final result would have been the same.
Same result, less success.
Right. Themba Gorimbo has a loss against AJ Fletcher, who's fine, whatever. His only win in the UFC was Takashi Sato. It was the fourth straight loss for Sato. Doesn't tell us much. The biggest thing for me and why I ultimately felt fairly confident in Rodriguez is we're being sold on Themba Gorimbo as this grappling ace, right? Like, that's why that's his thing. That's what the broadcast keeps talking about. He got hit with like a first day of jiu-jitsu class guillotine by AJ Fletcher, made no attempt to defend it and just tapped out. I understand that he was a little bit rocked going into that. Getting rocked by like 5'2" AJ Fletcher is a whole nother issue with his game. But you can't tell me that your thing is grappling and then you're getting caught in the guillotine without even trying to defend it. So I don't know a ton about either guys. I don't feel confident in my read in either of them. If you're going to bank on your grappling, you better not fall for something basic like that. And then I wanted to be on knockout or early stuff with Rodriguez, but not even that different from the money line. I think the books have figured out that that's what's going to happen. Probably will begrudgingly come back in with a hedge on Themba live the way that Sean pointed out, but would rather just let this one ride out and hopefully we don't have to see him back on the stools.
Now, this is one of those things, right? Like, I'm anticipating maybe a live entry on Themba. Watch their body language. See how they're both... If Pete looks fresh after round one, if Pete looks like he's raring to go for round two, don't bet against him. We don't know what he's going to look like. You know, oftentimes when I'm recommending a live bet, it's because I'm very confident that a guy is going to be tired after the first round or will tire halfway through the second round. We really don't know with Pete Rodriguez. So watch it. See how he looks. If he's standing up in the corner in between rounds looking like he's ready for round two, don't live bet against him. I think he's going to be fresh at that point. But definitely watch this one closely. Good fight to gather information. But I think the tall man defense for Gorimbo here, as you mentioned, against Fletcher, a smaller fighter, clipped him. I think with Rodriguez, it's going to be a problem too. These taller fighters, sometimes who have the reach advantage, but are not as good of strikers as their opponent, they tend to have that tall man defense, and they get clipped with those 3-ounce gloves because they can't shell up as much as they might with boxing gloves in a gym. So I think it does make a difference. This actually may be a situation where the striking favors the shorter fighter and the height and the reach favors the shorter fighter.
Well, especially in the smaller cage at the Apex against a guy who loves to work the body anyway. Like, you add those two factors in. Mm-hmm. And he just doesn't... You've said it in the past when I've tried to use, reach advantage as a selling point on a fighter. You're like, yeah, but so-and-so doesn't use that at all. Like, he doesn't actually keep you at range. So I think Themba is a perfect example of that, where, yeah, he's taller, but he doesn't really utilize that in a way that helps him. So I'm not too worried about the height.
Noted on the body language, do you have a price target in mind if Gorimbo is a live bet possibility?
Money. If you can go, if you can get plus money on Pete pre-fight and then get plus money on the other side after round one, or even a pick 'em price and sort of just have both sides riding at plus money where you're profitable no matter what, just sort of arb out on it. That's what I'd look for, find a way to profit no matter who wins after round one.
Okay, very good. Let's go to the prop market. Where are we looking this week, Zerillo?
There's a few angles that I like for prop perspectives. One I didn't write down here, Randy Brown to win in round 2 and round 3 in the featured fight on the main card against Muslim Salikov. Salikov, 40 years old. Randy Brown, a number of round 2 and round 3 finishes on his record, tends to build as the fight goes. I also kind of like him to win by submission, but Randy Brown, round 2, round 3, I think is a worthy late prop throw on this card. I also like Viviane Araujo by decision at plus 450. She's a big underdog against Natalie Silva. I don't mind her money line at plus 280, but Araujo very likely to win by a decision there if she does win, and plus 450, a very juicy number. She's going to be tough for the first 2 rounds. Her cardio tends to fade the longer her fights go, but a veteran, been in main events before, fighting a prospect who's taking a step up in competition. Prospect, by the way, with 5 losses on a record. I think Vivi Araujo, very live here this weekend, nearly a plus 300 underdog. And then lastly, Julia Stoliarenko, one of my favorite fighters to bet because I bet her the same way every time, and she keeps cashing it. Stoliarenko round 1, Stoliarenko by submission, and then after round 1, you'll look to live bet her opponent because she tends to quit. So Stoli to finish the fight early, maybe also Stoliarenko and Carolina fight to end inside the distance at a pick'em price as well. That also caught my attention. If Stoli doesn't get the finish, she tends to quit on herself. So I like that fight to end inside the distance and Stoliarenko to finish it in round 1.
Billy, how about yourself? Prop market, what jumps out to you?
Yeah, real quick on the Stoliarenko. I don't think they're up yet. Usually at BetMGM, we can bet on the type of submission. Stoliarenko has won her last 9 or something, have all been first round arm bars when she wins. So,
and Carolina has
honestly,
very long limbs and is just begging to get arm barred. So yeah, that's an easy play there.
Yeah, honestly, looking through her record, I don't know if she's ever won by anything other than an arm bar.
Arm bar specialist.
She has 1 split decision and then 10 submissions. I believe every single one is an arm bar. So just fun little thing they do at BetMGM that most places don't allow you to bet on.
They'll probably make it even money and make her submission prop 4-1, but yeah.
Yeah. But no, mine is, I teased it a little bit earlier. We were talking about differences in camps. Markel Madero's coming in off the Contender Series. He's a Factory X Muay Thai product out in Colorado. That's where, Chris Gutierrez, Kamaru Usman, Anthony Smith, really high level camp. I expect that to pay off for him. He picked up a knockout in his Contender Series fight. He has 6 knockouts of his 8 pro wins. He's fighting a guy, Landon Quinones, not really impressed by. Don't exactly know where he trains. Tapology lists it as either KO Gang or Kogang, and I don't know if it's a traditional martial arts school that's pronounced Kogang or it's the Knockout Gang. But either way, not like one of these big camps where we've heard of people. Didn't look great against Nasrat Haqparast in his debut. Haqparast more of a point fighter, not really trying to kill people the way that at least we've seen so far from Medeiros. So got to check the odds real quick. Markel Madero's knockout plus 220. I'm also going to sprinkle a little bit of his money line, but I think if he wins it, it's probably going to be a knockout.
Quinones is nicknamed the Lone Wolf, so I'd say it's very likely that he trains at a small gym that is not a very big name gym, considering the nickname. So, Lone Wolf kind of giving me the indication that it's a smaller gym.
I just want to know if it's a traditional martial arts school and I'm supposed to pronounce that like it's a Chinese word, or if he's knockout gang, It
kind of looks like it's written as knockout in capitals, like knockout gang. But yeah, I don't know. They have a Wolfpack logo on the wall on his Tapology photo as well. He's really into
he's a one-man Wolfpack in Vegas.
He's into the Wolf. Well, it's ironic though, because he's posing with another fighter. So it's a 2-man lone Wolfpack.
But you can see with all of this discussion why I'm fading him, to bring it back to the betting angle. These are not things we like to see at this level of the sport. You can get through some regional fights kind of just bouncing around gyms. Usually we don't like that for these high-level fights.
All right, let's wrap it up as we normally do with best bets. Sometimes it's a final bet. If you're not new to the show and you're a normal listener to the program, sometimes I don't know with Sean and Billy if it's really a final bet or if this indeed is a best bet. So Zarrillo, I'll let you take the baton.
It's a best bet.
All right.
I like Dino Belbita a lot this week. This is a rematch from a fight, I believe 6 years ago. Sorry, it's 4 years ago. McCann and Belbita faced off, and McCann at that point in the prime of her career, Belbita 23 years old at the time. Now in the prime of her career, right, at 27, whereas McCann is 33, had her arm broken by Julia Stoliarenko in her last fight, the armbar specialist. But in terms of how these two are trending in their respective careers, McCann kind of seems like she's on her way out of the UFC, has hit her ceiling. In terms of performances, it's been very evident that she's going to struggle when facing higher level grapplers, and they are trying to give her a step down into a striker in Diana Belbita. But the last time these two fought, even though Molly 30-25'd her across the board, you rewatch the fight, it is more competitive than those scorecards indicate. And when you bake in 4 years of progression, both athletically and in terms of training, you give Belbita slightly better takedown defense this time around. You actually regress McCann's skill set, right? Going from 29 to 33, being out of her physical prime. And you do see how this kind of plays out as much closer to a 50-50 fight than the odds would indicate. So I think you're getting a very square number here on Belbita purely because McCann won the first fight, where if you analyze their recent performances and you bake in the progression on either side, I think this is going to be a very competitive striking fight. McCann can possibly edge her out again with the takedowns and with the grappling, but I expect Belbita's defensive grappling to be much better than it was the first time around. So Belbita, the younger fighter here, reach advantage, 6-inch reach advantage. She's 3 inches taller. She's going to be the better kicker. And when we talk about using your length, using your range, as we did with the Gorimbo fight, Gorimbo not going to use it well, Belbita is going to use her kicks really well. And that will probably be her most thrown strike here against McCann, or at least it should be when these two are outrange. But she throws a lot of volume with her hands as well. I think this is going to be a very high volume striking affair. Both of them are going to land probably over 100 significant strikes. As I said, maybe the takedowns with McCann edge her over, but this should be a much closer fight than it was last time, and an even closer fight than that plus 220 line indicates. So Belbita on the money line, and I think at a 50-50 fight. Also like her by decision a little bit, but just going to take the money line here.
All right. Another plus money dog as a best bet. Didn't see that one coming for the first one back in 2024. Yeah. Billy Ward, best bet, final bet.
Yeah, before I get to mine, just one thing that I'm fully in agreement with Sean. I think I even put it in the Luck article, but Molly McCann dropping 10 pounds for this one for the first time in a while. 33 years old. I have never heard someone say, hey, now that I'm in my 30s, it's so much easier to lose weight. Never once heard someone say that. I think it's kind of like one of those things where rather than fix the hole in your game or figure out what went wrong, you're like, yeah, I'll just drop a weight class and bully everyone down there. And it usually doesn't work that way, even if you can physically get down there. So, yeah, love that pick from Sean. Full agreement.
And mine are more actually to Molly. She's never had the physique that it's like she can clearly move down in weight. Her nickname is literally Meatball. Like, she has that kind of physique. You know, she doesn't have a physique that you would go, yeah, she should clearly be a weight division lower. Mm-hmm. So we just talk about the speed advantage, right? That should already exist. Her dropping down in weight against the fighter who's already accustomed to that division. That's going to factor in even more to the speed.
But all right, sorry to cause that digression, but yeah, mine are, I'd say, more in the realm of final bets. The one, and I'm going to even butcher this one, Aliaskab Kizriev, I believe, taking on Makhmud Muradov. This is more of just a fade of Muradov. He's 1-2 in his last 3 fights. His win was against Brian Barberena at middleweight. Barberena had no business being a middleweight. I don't know what's going on there. Kizriev is 14-0, looks like a legit prospect. Just been very inactive. Contender Series fight in 2020. Took him 3 years to get back in there. Fought in 2022. Or 2 years to get back in there, another 2 years before this one. Don't know what's going on there, but he has given us nothing to think he's not, just a total marauder and going to roll through people. Pretty fair price in the minus 140s, depending on when and where you look. I'm fine with that. I don't think Muradov's that good. Then the other one, Thomas Peterson in the opener, minus 165. Another guy I think is a legit prospect. Taking on Jamal Pogues. Pogues is really just a 205er who either didn't want to cut weight anymore or wanted to fight worse competition, or potentially both. I don't think the UFC is trying to get in the Jamal Pogues business here. Peterson looked really good on the Contender Series. D1 wrestler at South Dakota State, way better athlete overall. I just think the size, I think, is too much for a guy like Pogues who really should be fighting 205. So I'm, don't love laying the juice on it. I wish I felt a little more confident in the method of victory, but minus 165 isn't bad on Peterson either.
All right, gents, good stuff. Good to have us back on the saddle, and we're off and running. UFC betting previews here on the Action Network podcast. That'll do it for this week's episode. We're presented by our friends at BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. Find more from Sean and Billy, especially those live betting angles. And as we get closer to Saturday, this pod will be out Friday afternoon, whenever you're listening. But once we get to Saturday, find these guys in the app if they add anything else in the free award-winning Action Network app. Best of luck with all your picks this weekend. For Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for listening to our UFC betting preview on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM.